Hi, my name is Leonardo Flores, and I'm an associate professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. I'm here to talk about my presentation today will be called ePoetry as Code and Data Remix. And my goal is to provide a brief overview of ways in which electronic literature repurposes code and data to achieve its artistic goals. I'll be using my resource I Heart ePoetry or I Love ePoetry for this purpose. This is a knowledge base of short form scholarship on born digital poetry and poetics. And you'll get to take a look at the resource as I present this. So, I'm going to present a little bit of a chronological version view of some works and some tendencies in repurposing and remixing from 1984 to the present. So let's take a peek at some of these practices. I want to begin with B.P. Nichol, Canadian poet uh, who produced a work called First Screening back in 1984. He used AppleSoft Basic to write this piece, and it's a suite of short animated concrete poems that you know dance on the screen based on uh, what that software can do. Now, this software was lovingly uh, ported and emulated by a team called Lionel Kearns, Dan Waver, Jeff Huth, and Jim Andrews, all of whom are writers, accomplished writers of electronic literature. And they've made available emulated JavaScript, QuickTime, and HyperCard versions. I want to show you a little snippet from the recording, the QuickTime recording. And here's one of the pieces called Island. Those of you familiar with, let's play it. Those of you familiar with concrete poetry will recognize that he's remixing a famous concrete poem by Ian Hamilton Finlay, a Scottish poet, but of course in a medium that moves. So those waves that hit the rock to produce an island in Finlay's poem, which he was printed on glass and installed on coasts, basically show the coastline, waves, and rock. Well, uh, if you add waves to the other side and you make them animated, you get yourself an island. So there is uh, B.P. Nichol's remix and repurposing of Finlay's poem. Now, there's another way, which is I find even more interesting, that B.P. Nichol is repurposing here, and it's with the code. If we look here at the code, this is in BASIC. You can see all sorts of instructions and subroutines and things to do. But if you notice the rem code right here, we're looking at basically, this is a code for documentation. It means, it's short for remark. And usually it's for programmers to say what it is they're doing in a particular section for other programmers. Well, Nichol repurposed this to write a poem, playing off of the word rem. So if we read this, starting in line 3900, rem mark, rem boat, rem main, rem rain, 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 rem boat, rem arc, rem bow, rem mark. And we can read it with the rem or without, depending on where it applies. In line 3900, we have arc, a boat, remain, in the boat, and you get a lot of rain. This is the story of the flood, of Noah's Ark. And of course, at the end of it, in line 3930, we can see the rainbow, which is the sign that the world wouldn't be destroyed this way ever again. Now, back here in the presentation, let's skip a little bit to the days of the early web. Back in 1999, Annie Abrahams produced a work called Alone. And this poem is repurposing the pop-up window. At the time, this is sort of one of those early inventions of the early web, the pop-up window was used for advertising, basically. Well, she took it and she borrowed a script. We can see here in the source code, she borrowed this script by Philippe Sarcher, written in 1998, JavaScript code, and it's made freely available. She provides full credit in the documentation. That sequencer she used to create a series of pop-up windows on which the poem and the words of the poem alone appear. I'm not going to show you the poem right now because it would create a lot of pop-up windows, and you will have to activate, allow pop-ups because they've been blocked by most browsers. But if you click here, you can access the poem and experience it for yourself. Now, remixing also happens with other structures. In 2001, Jim Andrews was working with Macromedia Director, it's now known as Adobe Director, and he found the code for asteroids. You remember Asteroids, the old video game from the 70s? Here you have a little ship shooting rocks in space. Occasionally there's a UFO, flying saucer that shoots back, and there you are moving along this sort of infinite canvas, destroying things, destroying rocks. Well, he decided he would use this to create a poem, and instead of shooting rocks, you are shooting language. So let's take a look at what this poem looks like. Here in play mode, here we have desire, and we can shoot the text, or we can be exploded by the text, and we can move around and read the text as it happens. As you can see, I'm not very good at this game, but part of the idea is that we are reading this poem. All right, let's close it. We are reading this poem as we play the poem. So you have both a repurposing of game structure, a repurposing of poetics, and a kind of a remix mashup of game poem in which we play read. And there are many levels, and it gets more complex, both in terms of its language and gameplay capabilities. And it puts readers, players, in a rather unique situation there. Now, in 2009, Nick Montfort wrote this poem called Taroko Gorge. And this poem basically generates, he had visited the Taroko Canyon in China, and he was inspired to write this nature poem. Let me read a little bit of it. Stone sweeps the flows, shapes hum, the crags range the basin, stamp the objective arched. Forests command the rippling, heights command the shape, track the driven. The crags sweep the veins hum, the crags dwell. Monkeys exercise the ripplings, run the encompassing, sinuous, straight arched. I'm going to stop right now, and you can keep reading the poem as it scrolls, but here's the little surprise thing, and I hate to spoil the surprise, but here we go. This is an endless poem. You could read and read and read, and you will never get to the end of it because it is generated on the fly. If we look at the source code, view page source, we can see that this poem is endlessly being produced from these variables. Here are the variables: above, below, transitive, imperative, in trans, and here's the data set: brow, mist, shape, layer, the crag. So here we have an endless number of recombinations of the same data, and therefore you have this endlessly recombinant poem. And yet, as you read it, it starts to take shape. And I would suggest that this is a fitting parallel or fitting expression of what it is you get when you are hiking in a space of nature. If you're hiking in Taroko Gorge, what do you see? Or in a river, what do you see? Water, ripplings, flows, mists, trees. And you hike for an hour, and what do you see? Flows, trees, rocks, ripplings, occasionally a monkey. There's a little subroutine that, you know, every once in a while you might get a monkey. They're sort of a rare show. So when you take the Taroko poem, later that year after this was published, Nick Montfort decided to, uh, not Nick Montfort, sorry, Scott Ragberg decided he was going to invert it. He was going to, in a way, parody the poem. And he took the source code, he changed the variables, and he changed the variables to include very urban kinds of materials. So here we have punk rocker, public servant, prostitutes, poets, war widows, addicts. We have Roppongi drunk, Shibusha shopper, gaijin, geisha. We have warm, warn, forgive, pick, hustle, trail. So the result of this, what's generated, is something that has a very different feel. You have an endless recombination of urban elements. And he sparked, by doing this, a whole set of remixes. J.R. Carpenter did one called Gorge, where she remixed the code to make it all digestive, filled it with digestive language. Andrew Plotkin took the code and wrote a remix that produces new poetic structures and basically new code for it. Very clever application. And there are over 20 different remixes, which I studied all, and I reviewed them all in I Love You Poetry, and I produced a piece called Transmogrify that gives you access to all of the remixes and all of the writing about the remixes, including a 2012 remix of Taroko Gorge by Nick Montfort. Definitely worth reading. So if you want to explore this more, you know where to go. Now, Twitter bots are a neat a neat way in which Twitter is being repurposed for artistic purposes. So for example, let's just take a very basic one. Here we have the Karl Marxov chain. Now, Moacir Paredes Herrera de Pereira produced this, basically took all of Karl Marx's code and he ran a Markov chain analysis. And with that Markov chain generator, it produces basically new Marx, or Karl Marx-like language. It analyzes the language for its probabilities, and it produces and generates new language and tweet lengths. So we can read some of the new works of Karl Marx. England and Naples, after the fall of state and the petty bourgeois, has been launched. The proletariat would derive from a fetter. It doesn't always make sense, but the results are occasionally quite interesting. Now, Pentametron is a different kind of bot. This one takes the Twitter stream and it detects, it runs all it detects basically tweets that are potentially iambic pentameter, and it checks every single word against an online dictionary used for other purposes, but he repurposes it to detect the metrical pattern of every tweet. And when it detects an iambic pentameter tweet, it then looks for a rhyming pair, and then it publishes it as a couplet. So Pentametron is constantly rediscovering and retweeting these tweets that are couplets in iambic pentameter. Haiku D2 does the same but with haikus. It's even more elaborate little engine. We have philosopher celebrity mashups. So Justin Bieber combines Martin Buber with Justin Bieber. Here they're mixing celebrity accounts with philosopher texts. Kanye West, Kim Kierkegaardashian. This is a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of these bots really are exploring humor. Latour Swag by Darius Gazemi actually takes Latour bot. So you have a Bruno Latour bot that is producing Bruno Latour text, and then it combines it with anything marked swag with the hashtag swag. And basically every 15 minutes you get a Latour bot piece that is also a mashup, a repurposing of the sort of Twitter stream and Bruno Latour's own theoretical writings. As you can see, the repurposing is happening at code, at data. We're at a time of amazing data resources where resources like Twitter that have APIs available are, can be then used not just for marketing purposes or for whatever other kind of research purposes. They can be repurposed for artistic purposes. And if you're interested in exploring more remixes in e-poetry or in e-literature, you can click on this link and it will perform a search for every entry that uses the word remix or that has the word remix in I Love E-Poetry. And you'll discover that there are many, many wonderful repurposings used for electronic literature out there. So feel free to visit iloveepoetry.com where you will find a link to this presentation. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Maria, for inviting me to participate in this. Good day.